Hi, Gemini. Welcome back, beautiful soul. I'm really grateful you're here today. Before we begin, I just want you to take a slow breath with me. Allow yourself to settle into this moment. You don't have to force anything. You don't have to chase any answers. Just listen to what resonates with your heart and gently leave behind whatever doesn't. As I begin laying your cards on the table, I already feel something quietly changing around your energy. It isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It feels like someone has finally started hearing the silence that you never intended to use as a message, but somehow it became one. For quite some time, it seems you stopped reaching quite the way you once did. Maybe you became tired of carrying every conversation. Maybe you simply chose your own peace, instead of wondering why someone couldn't meet you halfway anymore. Whatever brought you here, I don't feel anger surrounding your energy. I feel acceptance. And sometimes acceptance speaks much louder than words ever could. The first card resting on the table is the Four of Swords. As I look at it, I can't help but feel that your quietness has created a space this person never expected to experience. They were so familiar with your presence that they may not have realized how much comfort it brought until it slowly faded into the background. It's almost as though the room still remembers your laughter, even after you've walked away. Oh my God! The Five of Pentacles appears right beside it, and immediately I feel this heaviness surrounding their heart. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because they're beginning to notice the absence of something they quietly depended on. They may find themselves reaching for their phone without thinking, wondering whether you've sent a message, only to realize the screen remains empty. They may revisit conversations the two of you shared, smiling at certain memories before feeling that familiar ache return. It feels like they're discovering that missing someone isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in the smallest moments throughout the day. The Page of Swords catches my attention next, and I almost smile because this energy feels incredibly curious. It seems this person has started paying closer attention to you again. Perhaps they're checking your social media more often than they admit. Maybe they're asking mutual friends how you've been doing. Maybe they're simply wondering why your energy feels so different lately. Whatever the case, it doesn't feel like simple curiosity anymore. It feels like someone searching for reassurance that the connection hasn't disappeared completely. Yeah, I also keep hearing one message repeating itself. They miss talking to you. Not only the conversations themselves, but the way you made ordinary moments feel lighter. Gemini has a gift for bringing movement into someone's world. You ask unexpected questions. You laugh at unexpected moments. You make people think differently without even trying. I feel like this person is beginning to understand that your energy wasn't something they could easily replace. The Strength card quietly closes this part of the reading, and I feel it's speaking to you just as much as it's speaking about them. There may be moments where you're tempted to break the silence first, simply because your heart still cares. That's completely understandable. But I also feel this card gently encouraging you to trust your own emotional balance. You don't have to prove your love by carrying the entire connection. Sometimes giving another soul the opportunity to recognize your value is part of their own journey. It feels like this person is standing at the edge of a realization they haven't fully accepted yet. Every day that passes without hearing from you seems to raise another question inside them. They may not have all the answers today. They may still be sorting through emotions they kept buried for a long time, but something inside them has already begun moving, and I don't think they're as comfortable with this distance as they once pretended to be. As I gather these cards together, I can feel another layer of this story waiting underneath the surface. It seems the silence has already done what endless conversations never could, and the next cards are beginning to reveal why this connection is becoming impossible for them to ignore. Something feels remarkably different as I turn over the next group of cards. It's almost as if a veil has been lifted, not all at once, but little by little. The person connected to your energy may have spent a long time convincing themselves that what they felt could simply be ignored. They buried questions beneath responsibilities. They distracted themselves with routines. They told themselves that time would eventually quiet everything inside their heart. Yet the deeper they tried to push those feelings away, the louder they seemed to become. The first card revealing itself is Judgment. I feel this card arriving like a quiet awakening rather than a dramatic revelation. It's almost as though they're beginning to hear their own inner voice again after living with so much noise around them. There are moments where they may suddenly remember something you once said, words that didn't fully make sense back then, but somehow carry an entirely different meaning today. It's interesting because maturity has a way of changing how we remember people. Sometimes we don't realize someone's value until we've had enough life experience to understand what they were truly offering. Yeah, I keep feeling that your connection has become a mirror for them. Not a mirror showing perfection, but one showing truth. They may be recognizing parts of themselves they never wanted to face before. The conversations you shared weren't simply conversations anymore. They were invitations to grow. Perhaps that's why your presence has lingered in their thoughts for much longer than they expected. The star quietly appears beside judgment, and immediately everything softens. I don't feel desperation here. I feel hope returning in a way that surprises even them. They may have believed this chapter was completely closed, but something inside keeps whispering that perhaps it isn't. Maybe there is still something unfinished between the two of you. Maybe life hasn't written the final page yet. Oh my God! They seem to be looking back over your entire journey together from a completely different perspective. Situations that once felt confusing are beginning to connect like pieces of a puzzle. Decisions they defended so confidently in the past no longer seem quite as certain. They may even wonder why they overlooked someone who consistently brought honesty, warmth, and emotional safety into their life. It isn't necessarily regret taking over. It feels more like understanding finally catching up. The Hanged Man rests gently beneath these cards, and I can't help feeling that this person has slowed down enough to actually observe what their heart has been trying to say. Sometimes life forces us to pause, not because we're being punished, but because we're finally ready to see something we've been avoiding. I feel that's exactly where they are. Their priorities seem to be shifting. Success doesn't look the same anymore. Validation from other people doesn't feel nearly as satisfying. They're starting to ask themselves a very different question. Instead of asking what they can achieve, they're quietly asking who truly makes them feel understood. Gemini, your energy seems to have challenged their entire understanding of love. Before meeting you, they may have believed love was mostly about excitement, timing, or chemistry, but you brought conversations they couldn't forget. You made them think beyond the surface. You encouraged them, perhaps without even realizing it, to become more authentic. It feels like they're only beginning to understand how deeply your influence reached into their life. The final card, Ace of Cups, almost glows as it lands on the table. I don't see this as an ending. I see it as an emotional doorway beginning to open inside someone who once kept every feeling tightly locked away. They may still be cautious. They may still have unanswered questions, but it feels increasingly difficult for them to pretend this connection meant less than it actually did. I also feel they're becoming aware of something very simple, yet incredibly powerful. No matter how many people they've met or conversations they've had since then, nobody seems to leave behind the same sense of peace that Gemini did. Different faces came and went, different experiences filled their days. Yet none of them carried that familiar feeling of being completely seen without needing to become someone else. Perhaps that's why your name keeps returning to their thoughts when everything around them becomes quiet. Perhaps that's why memories arrive without invitation, bringing smiles they didn't expect and emotions they believed had disappeared long ago. It feels like their heart has finally stopped arguing with itself and instead has started listening to what it has known for much longer than their mind was willing to admit. As I gather these cards together, another layer of their journey begins revealing itself. The choices they're preparing to make don't seem to be driven by fear anymore. They feel guided by something much deeper, and the next cards may begin showing what they're finally ready to leave behind in order to move closer to the future they've quietly been imagining. A quiet sense of determination begins to settle over this reading. The energy doesn't feel rushed anymore. It feels like someone has finally reached the point where holding on to the past has become more exhausting than letting it go. That's a very different place to stand, Gemini. Sometimes the biggest transformation isn't loud enough for the world to notice. It happens deep inside someone's heart, where old fears slowly lose their grip. The first card resting before me is Death, and I immediately feel that this person is closing a chapter they once believed they had to keep alive forever. It may be an old relationship, an outdated belief, a responsibility they carried for far too long, or simply a version of themselves that no longer fits the life they're trying to create. Whatever it is, it seems they are beginning to understand that not everything deserves to follow them into the future. Yeah, I keep feeling this gentle release taking place. There was a time when they believed certain obligations mattered more than their own happiness. They may have chosen comfort over honesty, familiarity over authenticity, or expectations over their own heart. Looking back, those priorities don't seem nearly as convincing anymore. Life has a way of teaching us that some decisions only make sense until we finally learn what truly matters. The Six of Cups quietly appears beside death, and the atmosphere softens immediately. It's interesting because I don't feel this card pulling them backward. Instead, it feels like it's reminding them where their heart naturally wants to return. Your connection doesn't seem trapped inside nostalgia. It feels alive. They remember conversations that still make them smile. They remember feeling accepted without having to prove themselves. They remember how easy it was to laugh around you before life became so complicated. Oh my God, I almost feel them comparing every emotional experience since then to what they shared with you. Perhaps they never intended to do that. Perhaps it simply happened without them realizing it. Every meaningful connection somehow circles back to Gemini. Every genuine moment reminds them of someone who encouraged them to be themselves without asking them to become someone different first. The Hierophant arrives with a surprisingly calm energy. I don't sense pressure here. I sense clarity. The idea of commitment seems to be changing inside them. Maybe they once viewed serious relationships as limitations or sacrifices. Maybe they believed freedom meant keeping one foot outside the door, but something has shifted. It feels like they're beginning to recognize that real stability isn't the opposite of freedom. Sometimes it's the place where freedom finally feels safe enough to exist. I also feel they're becoming more intentional with the future they're trying to build. Small decisions suddenly carry greater meaning. The people they spend time with, the conversations they entertain, the habits they continue repeating. Everything seems to be passing through a new filter inside their mind. They're no longer asking what feels easy today. They're asking what will still matter years from now. The Ten of Pentacles settles onto the table almost effortlessly, and I can't ignore how peaceful this energy feels. This doesn't strike me as someone chasing temporary excitement anymore. It feels like they're quietly imagining what a stable life could actually look like. Home begins appearing in their thoughts differently. Partnership begins carrying a different weight. The future no longer feels like an abstract dream. It feels like something they genuinely want to create, with the right person standing beside them. Gemini, I keep sensing that your presence has become part of that picture more often than they probably admit. Not because they're forcing themselves to imagine it, but because every time they think about lasting happiness, your energy somehow finds its way into the story. They may still have practical concerns. They may still be untangling situations that require patience. Yet their heart seems increasingly certain about the direction it wants to follow. There is also a quiet desire to repair what was left unfinished. I don't feel they're trying to erase the past or pretend mistakes never happened. It feels much more genuine than that. They're beginning to understand that healing sometimes starts with honesty, and honesty requires courage. That courage may still be growing, but it no longer feels absent. As these cards come together, I can't help feeling that preparation has replaced hesitation. Choices that once seemed impossible are becoming easier to imagine, and it feels like their attention is slowly shifting towards something they haven't quite found the words to express yet. The next cards may begin revealing how that unspoken truth starts searching for its own voice. A feeling of hesitation lingers over these cards, but it doesn't feel like someone who no longer cares. Quite the opposite. It feels like someone standing in front of an unopened door, holding the key in their hand, wondering whether it's already too late to knock. There is movement inside this energy, yet every step forward seems to come with another question they haven't quite answered. The first card turning over is the Eight of Wands, and I almost smile because the desire to communicate feels impossible to ignore. It seems this person has replayed countless conversations inside their mind. They may have written messages they never sent, deleted words before pressing send, or stared at your name on their screen far longer than they would ever admit. It's almost as though every ordinary day presents another opportunity to reach out, yet something continues stopping them just before they cross that line. I don't think it's a lack of feelings. It feels much more like they're searching for the right moment, hoping there is still a version of this story where the conversation doesn't end before it even begins. They want their words to matter. They want you to understand everything they struggled to express before. But the longer they wait, the heavier those unspoken emotions seem to become. The Nine of Swords quietly settles beside the Eight of Wands, and suddenly I can feel the weight they've been carrying when nobody else is watching. Their strongest conversations with you may not even be happening out loud. They happen late at night when the world becomes quiet. They imagine what they would say if they finally heard your voice again. They picture your reaction. They wonder whether you would listen or whether you would simply thank them for reaching out before walking away forever. Yeah, that fear feels very real to them. Not because they believe you're unkind, but because they know enough time has passed for things to change. People grow, hearts heal, life moves forward. They seem to understand that they are no longer speaking to the same Gemini they once knew. Experience has shaped you. Silence has strengthened you. They can't assume you'll still be waiting in the same place they left you. The Four of Pentacles appears, and I immediately sense how tightly they've been holding on to emotions they never fully expressed. This isn't someone who finds vulnerability easy. They've become so accustomed to protecting themselves that opening their heart almost feels unfamiliar. There is still a part of them trying to maintain control, trying to predict every possible outcome before taking even the smallest emotional risk. Oh my God! I feel like they keep asking themselves the same question. What if I reach out and they're happier without me? That single thought seems to stop them over and over again. They don't only fear rejection, they fear discovering that the opportunity they once had no longer exists. It's a difficult realization, because sometimes the greatest regret isn't making the wrong choice. Sometimes it's waiting too long to make the right one. The King of Cups rests gently on the table, and everything about the energy changes. Beneath all the uncertainty, I sense someone whose feelings have become steadier than they were before. They're no longer reacting from impulse. They aren't chasing temporary excitement. What they feel seems quieter, deeper, and much more honest. It almost feels like they've finally reached the point where pretending not to care requires far more energy than simply admitting the truth. Gemini, your presence seems to inspire something they didn't always know how to express. Around you, they wanted to become a better version of themselves, even if they didn't have the emotional language to explain it back then. Looking back, they may recognize moments where pride spoke louder than love, where fear disguised itself as distance, and where silence created misunderstandings neither of you truly wanted. I also keep sensing that they're rehearsing a conversation that hasn't happened yet. They imagine apologizing without making excuses. They imagine listening instead of defending themselves. Most of all, they imagine seeing your expression the moment your eyes meet again. That possibility seems to fill them with equal amounts of hope and nervousness. It feels like courage is growing little by little inside them. Not all at once, and perhaps not as quickly as either of you would like, but it's growing. Every day brings them closer to choosing honesty over fear, and the cards waiting beneath my hands suggest that this quiet preparation may soon begin turning into something far more tangible than thoughts left unsent. A quiet shift settles over the table as these cards reveal themselves. The energy doesn't feel uncertain anymore. It feels like someone has reached the point where staying silent has become heavier than speaking their truth. There is still emotion here, still vulnerability, but it seems to be moving in a very different direction. Instead of running away from their feelings, they're beginning to walk toward them. Judgment is the first card resting before me once again, but this time it carries an entirely different feeling. I don't see someone looking backward anymore. I see someone preparing to answer a call they've ignored for far too long. It's almost as if their heart has finally become louder than every excuse they used to protect themselves. They may not have every detail figured out yet, but they seem to know one thing with surprising clarity. They don't want this connection to become another story they regret for the rest of their life. Yeah, I keep feeling that something inside them has finally clicked into place. The endless overthinking, the hesitation, the waiting for perfect timing, it all seems to be losing its power. They may be realizing that life rarely gives us perfect moments. Sometimes the only thing we truly have is the courage to be honest while the opportunity is still within reach. Oh my God. The tower appears, and while many people become nervous when they see this card, that's not what I'm feeling today. This feels like a breakthrough disguised as disruption. A wall they've been hiding behind seems ready to come down. Perhaps it's their pride. Perhaps it's an old belief that they needed to appear strong all the time. Whatever it is, it no longer feels sustainable. There comes a moment when pretending everything is fine becomes more painful than admitting what the heart has known all along. I also feel circumstances around them beginning to change in unexpected ways. Something that once kept the two of you apart may no longer carry the same influence. Responsibilities shift, perspectives evolve, emotional barriers become easier to recognize. It doesn't necessarily mean everything suddenly becomes simple, but it does feel like the distance separating your paths is no longer growing. Little by little, it seems to be shrinking. The Eight of Wands lands gently beside the tower, and immediately I sense movement. Real movement. Not just imagined conversations or silent wishes, but energy that wants to become action. They may find themselves reaching for their phone more confidently than before. They may begin thinking less about what could go wrong and more about what could finally be made right. It almost feels like the words they've carried inside for so long are beginning to ask for freedom. I wouldn't be surprised if communication arrives in an unexpected way. Perhaps it's a message that seems simple on the surface but carries much deeper meaning underneath. Perhaps it's a chance encounter neither of you planned, or maybe life simply creates an opening where both hearts finally feel ready to speak honestly. Whatever form it takes, I don't feel it arriving through pressure. It feels natural, almost as though life has quietly been arranging the pieces behind the scenes. The Six of Cups brings such warmth into this reading that I can't help but smile. There is something beautifully familiar surrounding this energy. Not because either of you are returning to who you once were, but because you're remembering what originally connected your hearts before fear complicated everything. They don't seem interested in repeating old patterns. They seem interested in creating new memories built upon greater understanding. I also feel them carrying one quiet promise inside themselves. They don't want to disappear again. They don't want to repeat the same silence that created so much confusion between you. If they choose to come forward, it feels like they're hoping to show consistency rather than temporary emotion. That alone tells me they've been learning far more than they've allowed anyone to see. Gemini, your energy throughout this journey has remained surprisingly steady. You may not even realize how much your own growth has influenced theirs. Sometimes the most powerful invitation isn't asking someone to change. It's becoming so aligned with yourself that they begin questioning everything they once believed about love, commitment, and what truly matters. As I slowly gather these cards together, I can sense one final layer waiting beneath them. The path between two hearts feels far more open than it once did, yet one important choice still remains. The next cards seem ready to reveal how this story begins stepping beyond possibility and into a future both of you may finally be ready to embrace. A gentle sense of peace settles over the table as the final cards reveal themselves. The energy feels lighter than it did at the beginning of this journey. Not because every question has already been answered, but because both hearts seem to have traveled through enough lessons to recognize what truly deserves another chance. There is a quiet maturity here that wasn't present before, and I think that's what makes this ending feel so meaningful. The Six of Cups appears first, bringing a warmth that feels both familiar and completely new. It isn't asking either of you to return to the past. Instead, it feels like an invitation to remember what was always genuine, beneath the misunderstandings, the distance, and the silence. Some connections survive because they refuse to change. This one seems different. It has survived because both of you have changed. Yeah, I keep sensing that this person has finally made a decision inside their heart. It may have taken much longer than either of you expected. They may have questioned themselves countless times along the way. They may have tried convincing themselves that moving on would somehow be easier. Yet every path they explored seems to have brought them back to the same quiet realization. There is something unfinished between you that still deserves honesty. The Ten of Cups settles beside the Six of Cups, and I can't help but smile. This doesn't feel like someone chasing a fantasy anymore. It feels like someone beginning to understand that lasting happiness is built through openness, consistency, and mutual respect. The future they're imagining seems much calmer than before, less dramatic, less uncertain, more focused on creating a life where both people can simply breathe, laugh, and feel emotionally safe together. Gemini, one message keeps coming through very clearly for you. Continue honoring your own worth. Continue trusting the person you've become throughout this journey. You were never meant to lose yourself while waiting for someone else to find their way. The growth you've experienced has its own beautiful purpose, regardless of how this story unfolds. It feels important that you carry your confidence forward instead of returning to old patterns that asked you to doubt yourself. Oh my God! The Lovers arrives with such a beautiful sense of balance. I don't see this card speaking only about romance. It also feels like choice. A conscious choice. A choice made with open eyes instead of wishful thinking. It seems this person is no longer choosing from fear, loneliness, or obligation. They want to choose from authenticity. That alone changes everything because decisions made from the heart tend to create very different outcomes than decisions made simply to avoid discomfort. I also feel that many of the misunderstandings which once seemed impossible to untangle are beginning to lose their power. Time has offered perspective. Life has softened certain edges. Neither of you appears to be standing in exactly the same place emotionally as before. That's actually something quite beautiful, because reconciliation often becomes healthier when two people return as wiser versions of themselves, instead of trying to recreate who they used to be. The world gently completes this reading, and I feel an overwhelming sense of completion rather than finality. One cycle appears ready to close, so another can begin with much greater awareness. Whatever happens after this moment seems to carry far more honesty than what came before. Whether it's a heartfelt conversation, a reunion, or simply the quiet understanding that both souls have finally found peace, everything feels guided toward healing instead of repeating old wounds. I also want to remind you that every collective reading speaks differently to every person listening. Take the pieces that resonate with your own journey and allow the rest to remain simply part of the story. Sometimes healing arrives exactly the way we imagined. Sometimes it chooses an entirely different path. Either way, your heart deserves patience, kindness, and the freedom to continue growing. As I look at these final cards one last time, I feel gratitude more than anything else. Gratitude for every lesson that shaped this connection. Gratitude for every moment that taught both of you what love truly asks of us. Most of all, gratitude that hope still exists where fear once seemed much louder. Gemini, thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I truly hope this reading brought you a little comfort, a little clarity, and perhaps a little more trust in your own journey. Please take gentle care of yourself, keep listening to your intuition, and remember that your story is still unfolding, one beautiful chapter at a time. I'll see you in the next reading. Bye for now.